on-chain things. Your planning system, how do you pick the surface? Is it a threshold-based technique? Is it a Hounsfield-based, solid Hounsfield, that's the value technique? So it's going to affect your physics program in a lot of different ways, and so those things need to be evaluated as you go through. But immobilization is a big one because it is, it can be very obstructive to the camera.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. I think now we have to move on to the next presentation. Sorry for to the floor. And I think we are going to have Mr. Luke Rock from Beacon Hospital in Dublin, Ireland. So he's going to talk to us about enhancing quality with SGRT in SRS and SBRT treatments. So I hand over the platform to Mr. Luke Rock, please.
Thank you. Hope you can all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear.
Great. Well, thank you for the invite. I know it's quite late there in the evening, so I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can. Apologies in advance for my accent. I hope it doesn't pose too many problems for you all. My name is Luke Rock. I'm a medical physicist at Beacon Hospital in Dublin, in Ireland. And I'm just going to talk to you today about our experience using Align RT for surface guidance for both cranial and extracranial radiosurgery. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Oh, sorry, I have to do it myself. Yeah, sorry, apologies. So I'll quickly outline the talk. I'll talk a little bit about our SRS program, why we chose to use Align RT, and the steps that were involved in getting it into clinical implementation. And then I'll try and look at how we use it for SRS and SABRE, and if we have time at the end, I have a couple of interesting clinical examples which I think have shown the benefits of Align RT for our centre. So our SRS program here at Beacon Hospital in Dublin began in almost 11 years ago, actually, this week. And we've treated over 900 patients since then. So we have quite an extensive experience in intracranial SRS. The majority of our work, you won't be surprised to hear, are brain metastases, but we've also treated some benign lesions like trigeminal neuralgia, meningiomas, vestibular schwannomas, so usual brain work that you will see in most centres. When we began our program actually in 2007, we had a system called the Varying Real-Time Optical Guidance Platform, which was a head ring and shown on the left here, and a bite plate shown here on the right, which was monitored by this camera. Varian actually ended support of this in 2014. So 4 years ago, we were in the position of having to move to another system for localization for our radiosurgery patients. And this is where Align RT came into our thinking then. So we looked at two products at the time. One was what was fairly standard at the time, Brainlab ExactTrack, and it was quite commonly used for radiosurgery treatments worldwide. And a product that was really new onto the market, which was Vision RT's Align RT surface guidance system. And just a little summary, I won't go into great detail between both, but a little summary of the things we looked at when we were considering which system to purchase. So there's no getting away from it. Cost is, for all our administrations in every hospital, cost is a key indicator. And Align RT obviously was cheaper than Brainlab for us. In terms of installation, there was very little construction work, so it was installed in a half a day compared to our Brainlab system, which we were told would take 2 weeks of install. So we would lose what was for us a clinical linear accelerator for 2 whole weeks. The thing we really liked about Align RT is that it actually gave us real-time monitoring, as opposed to the ExactTrack system at the time only had snap verification, so you had to decide when you wanted to take an image of the patient with Brainlab, whereas Align RT monitored patients continually throughout the whole treatment. As you're probably fully aware, the method of alignment is a little bit different. So Align RT's surface guidance is the external contour of the patient, whereas Brainlab uses the internal anatomy of the patient. Both systems allow for non-coplanar treatments, and both systems allow for 6 degrees of freedom. For the ExactTrack, that was using the robotic couch. For us at the time with Align RT, jig to go on the bed, which was called a head adjuster, and I'll show you that in a few slides' time. And then in terms of patient comfort, Align RT allowed us to move towards using open face masks as opposed to the closed face mask from Brainlab. And this is something we've been considering for some time in our centres. So for us, that was another benefit of Align RT. So we obviously we decided to buy Align RT, and we installed it just over 4 years ago in September 2014. Since then, we've treated over 300 patients with Align RT for intracranial SRS. This, I think, certainly the largest SRS series with Align RT in Europe, and I believe it may be the largest SRS series outside of the US, actually. It's well tolerated by all our patients. I think we've had literally a handful of patients who have been unable to tolerate their SRS treatment using Align RT. And to be honest, I think those patients wouldn't have been able to tolerate SRS treatment with any system, really. And allowed us, I had a very similar interface to the Varian OGP system that we had transitioned from. So it kind of reduced some of the training for our staff and allowed us to implement it quite quickly. So briefly about the installation, it was quite painless actually. The Vision RT room survey was done about a month prior to install, so that took a Vision RT engineer came on site for an afternoon and just looked at our bunker and decided where the cameras were going to be installed, and left just some steel plates for our own facilities people to mount onto the ceiling. Very simple. And then the engineer came back and actually installed the cameras over a weekend. We did acceptance testing on Monday, followed by a couple of days of commissioning, and we treated the first patient that week. And the only thing we had to do to the Linac was install an additional card to allow the Linac to talk with the Align RT software. All very straightforward, to be honest. And then for commissioning, again, we took a very simplified view of this. We commissioned all the interfaces from Align RT to the Linac, so that's dosimetric in terms of beam hole and mechanical in terms of the couch readouts. We obviously made sure that the patient information transfer from the treatment planning system and the Linac to Align RT was correct, and the integrity of that was maintained. And we also checked that the IEC scale on both systems were the same. We then did a Winston-Lutz test comparison between the Linac and the Align RT cameras to see that they both had this a very similar view of where the isosensor of the machine was. And we also did an end-to-end test evaluation using this phantom you can see here, which is provided by MD Anderson. And the results are here. So our dose to the center of the target was actually 1.6%, and the film gamma index were both 99%. So really good agreement, and we were happy that Align RT was setting our patient up to the correct place relative to the isocenter, and we were delivering the correct dose. So just looking at some of our workflows then, I'll talk a little bit about what we do at treatment planning, our QA before treatment, and then how we actually treat the patient, which is probably the most interesting part. So in terms of simulation, as I said before, we're using an open face mask. We use the double shell positioning system from Macromedics. And this consists of a top shell seen here on the left with a bottom occipital shell here. And it's important when the patient goes in the shell at CT simulation that this occipital shell is actually quite deep, because this is really what holds the patient in place. So we tell our therapists to make sure to push the patient's head down into the shell such that there's only a finger or two of space below us. We also got to make sure that there's enough of the face outside the mask for the region of interest that the Align RT cameras will monitor. There's a bit of a trade-off there in that case. Okay, so this is the top shell here. And it may be hard to pick up on your screens there, but there's a small indent here that we use for the patient's mouth. The patient grips this with their teeth during treatment, and we found that this really helps stopping the patient rotating their head in the cranial caudal direction. or as we call it, pitching their head. It's important when we make these masks that we keep the patient's chin as close to their chest as possible, and the reason for this is in the treatment room we have 3 cameras. 2 of them are at the side of the patient and 1 looks straight down the bed at the gantry. So as the gantry is rotating around the patient, a camera will be blocked, so it's not giving any information to the system about the patient. And so you're really relying on this camera that's looking straight down the bed towards the patient. And if the patient's chin is not pushed down towards their chest, we'll actually end up not getting a whole lot of information of their frontal bones, which is the part of the skull that we really want to monitor. And we end up getting a very noisy result on a line RT. So it took us a little time to train our therapists not to have the patient's head in too neutral a position and to make sure that their chin was as far down as possible. So this ROI, or region of interest selection, I think Mike covered a little bit of this in his previous presentation, but for us it's really important. This is probably the primary cause of error or noise when we're using a line RT. And there's some fairly basic rules. One, that the region of interest should only be on the patient's anatomy. It shouldn't be on the mask. Obviously we want to monitor the patient's movement, not the mask movement. It should exclude the cheeks because they can be quite mobile. And it should use the frontal bones of the skull here, so up around the top of the eyebrows, down the bridge of the nose as well. We also ask our patients not to wear any makeup or false eyelashes. It's been our experience that these can actually cause the system to give some erroneous results. Pre-treatment QA is actually very straightforward, only takes a couple of minutes, uses a calibration plate shown here, and we have a tolerance of 0.3 millimeter for each of the cameras. Our radiation therapists perform this every day. As I said, it takes literally 2 to 3 minutes. It's no great hardship for anybody. For the physics team, we actually, before each treatment, we do a Winston-Lutz test using a ball bearing, pretty standard pre-radiosurgery QA. And we also actually perform a Winston-Lutz test using the cameras, using a calibration cube that's supplied by Vision RT. For this calibration cube, it has multiple ball bearings. You can see them here in the image on the bottom right. And it uses these to measure where the center of the isocenter is. So we take 4 portal images, 1 at each of the 4 cardinal angles. Then we import it into a line RT, and it gives us a result of where it thinks we have to move to get to the isocenter. So we can actually map that back then to our own independent Winston-Lutz, and it gives us an idea of how well the cameras agree with where the measured isocenter for the linac is. And we do that every day. It takes roughly 30 to 35 minutes. So this is the head adjuster I was explaining earlier on. We have we use a line RT on a Trilogy Clinac, which is 10 years old now. It's actually due for replacement. We're going to be getting a Varian Edge in the new year, which will come with a robotic couch. But until then, we've been using this head adjuster, which has 6 degrees of freedom for the head only, to allow us to set up our radiosurgery patients. So when they're setting them up, this is just a little video, and it's going to show you the Align RT screen and the motions of the patient as we're setting them up. So I'll just press play, and I hope you can see that here. So you can see these deltas. Mike was talking about these. So these are basically the distance from isocenter for each of the translations and rotations. And so we manually adjust the patient's head on the occipital mask until they're fairly close to isocenter, within a millimeter or 2. Then we put the frontal part of the shell on, and that's just about to happen now, I think. You'll see that. You'll see these come in. And then we use the head adjuster to zero out the patient position. All in, it takes roughly 2 to 3 minutes to set the patient up, which is pretty quick. Certainly compared to our, you can see it there now, we're within 0.2 or 0.3 of a millimeter of isocenter. And we, like I I say, it takes 2 or 3 minutes, and relative to using head rings or full face masks, it's a lot quicker than our previous systems. And once we have the patient set up and close to IsoCenter, we actually acquire a reference image of the cameras of the patient, and you can see that come up there now. And this is what we will use for monitoring the patient position for the remainder of that treatment fraction then. Okay, so following setup of the patient with Align RT to IsoCenter, we then actually acquire a cone beam CT to actually verify using internal anatomy that the patient is at IsoCenter. And the trouble for Align RT with this is, as the gantry is rotating around the patient during the cone beam CT acquisition, both the gantry and the X-ray tube or the X-ray detector of the OBI can actually block 2 cameras simultaneously for what is a very short period of time. And so we won't be able to capture any patient movement during that brief period. It's usually a second or 2. What we do is we take a note of the patient position both at the start and the end of the cone beam CT acquisition, and that gives us an idea whether the patient has actually moved during the cone beam CT acquisition. This is just a small flow chart of our patient setup for SRS. So a little bit untidy, but if we start here on the left-hand side, we position the patient with Align RT, and then we acquire a cone beam CT. And we ask, has the patient moved during the cone beam CT? If we're happy that they haven't, we continue on, do our match and apply our shifts, and then capture a new reference treatment of the patient image using the cameras, and that then becomes our reference for monitoring for the remainder of the treatment. We also then view the cone beam CT offline, because we don't have a robotic couch, we don't have 6 degrees of freedom online, only in offline corrections. And we just check that the rotations, i.e. that the cone beam CT and Align RT are agreeing to within half a degree or half a millimeter of the patient position. And if they are, we proceed and treat the patient. It's very rare actually that we actually have to come back and acquire a second cone beam CT. Typically it's because the patient has moved either during the matching of the cone beam CT or during the cone beam CT acquisition. I'm going to add some data on that on the next slide. So this was just a random selection of approximately 80 patients from our experience, and we can see that out of 78 treatments actually, only 5 patients required a second cone beam CT. So it's been tolerated very well. Our patients are not moving in that open face mask. They're actually being very still, and that Align RT and our cone beam CT are actually both agreeing quite well with where the patient's position is. These are in millimeters, so this is agreement within 0.3 of a millimeter or 0.3 of a degree, so pretty decent agreement there, I think. So comparing our cone beam CT online shifts then with Align RT, we can see that for the translations, 98% of them are less than 2 millimeters. And in terms of rotation, again, we only have 4 degrees of freedom with our OBI system, so we can only look at couch rotation. But we can see that 94% are less than 1 degree. So again, our Align RT and our OBI agree very well with where the patient is on the treatment bed. So the one place we do see patient movement is pitch, so that's rotation in the cranial-caudal direction. And this was one case where we had pitch of 2 degrees, and you can see that the lesion has moved right out to the edge of the PTV. So this is something we're quite careful about, and this is why we continue to have cone beam CT just to check that the patient stays in the correct position. And this pitch we found, as you would expect, that it's really the front and back of the brain that actually gives us most of the pitch. You can see the cerebellum, frontal and occipital lobes here. So just to summarise for radiosurgery, and that installation and commissioning was very straightforward. It took approximately a week all in for installation and commissioning before we treated our first patient. It allows for real-time monitoring of the patient, which for us is really important. We're getting excellent agreement with cone beam CT imaging. And again, remember that the Align RT system will give you readings down to 0.1 of a millimeter, whereas the OBI, the best resolution we can apply from that is 1 millimeter. So it's much more sensitive than the cone beam CT. And the open face mask really does increase patient comfort and compliance. And this was something we had a concern about when we started, that using an open face mask for SRS, we would have less rigid immobilization, and would it mean that the patient would move a lot more? It's actually been the opposite, in that because of the increased comfort from the open face mask, we find that a lot of our patients move less. And in actual fact, a lot of them fall asleep during the treatment, which is a sure sign that they're comfortable. So moving on to our SABRE patients, again, we've implemented Align RT for all our non-lung SABRE patients. So that's spinal, prostate, abdominal, extremities. And similarly with our SRS, we're still using cone beam CT localization, but we're now using Align RT to monitor the patient position during. And so Align RT effectively acts as almost like an extra set of eyes on the patient while we're performing our cone beam CT matching and making sure that they're not moving, or if they are, that we pick it up. Again, the ROI selection is really critical to the success of this monitoring for SABRE treatments, and it really is patient dependent. There are a couple of general rules, again, similar to what we saw with the SRS. Use only rigid structures, must only be part of the patient, so don't include any of the immobilization devices or any loose tissue or mobile skin or anything like this. Excuse me. So this is an example, and I think Mike's gone through a few of these, so I'll skip through these quite quickly. This is an example for a thoracic patient, or even liver or CRT spine. So you want to include the sternum, that's a bony anatomy, some anterior lateral ribs. But you don't want to include the diaphragm or the abdomen, because they're going to move due to respiration, and you don't want to use any loose or mobile skin tissue. Again, as Mike mentioned, we also use gated treatment captures, which we find very useful in averaging out that any respiratory motion we're seeing on the Vision RT signal. This is an example of a pelvis patient. So the top two are good ROIs, again, across the hips, down, fairly deep, so laterally, but again, make sure not to include any back bags or mobilization devices that are coming up anteriorly to this. And do not include any excessive tissue. So you can see here, this patient's abdomen is included in the ROI. That's going to give you a bad result. So a couple of case studies, if I have time, I think I might. This first one is a sternal metastasis patient that we treated in a single fraction to 18 gray with a 22 gray simultaneous integrated boost delivered to the GTV. And we set this patient up with cone beam CT, and I'll just flick through it there. You can see it's actually an excellent match. The patient set up very well, as you would expect at the bony setup. So we applied our cone beam CT shifts, and then we acquired a reference image capture with the Align RT cameras. And then we were doing our timeout before beam on with the targets and the physicists. And when we went back, just as we were about to beam on, we noted that Align RT had detected some patient movement. So we went and took a lateral kilovoltage image shown here, and you can see quite a significant shift of the sternum outside of out to the edge of the PTV. And actually, this patient had moved 4 millimeters in the vertical direction and 7 millimeters longitudinally. This was not a move we would have caught if it hadn't been for our Align RT monitoring the patient. Certainly, in terms of SABRE, you're not going to see any shift like this on your in-room CCTV monitors. So without Align RT, we certainly would have mistreated this patient. And this shows just some of the dose distribution difference there. So gross sum of the dose of the GTV and PTV. And then finally, this is my last example. I'll finish up now in a minute. This was a claustrophobic patient who came back with a brain met here in the cerebellum, refused to wear a mask. So couldn't even wear an open face mask actually. So we treated her using the occipital portion of the mask only. So we had incomplete immobilization, but we increased our PTV, reverted to a standard fractionation, and we used a line RT then to tell us if the patient was actually moving or not. And for such a highly claustrophobic patient, because of just using the occipital part of the mask, she was actually very comfortable and actually didn't move at all. And we noted our motion was less than 2 millimeters. And we treated her at the start of 2018, and she returned just last month for a recurrence in another part of the brain. We were able to treat her again. I think the key thing here is without the line RT, there's no way we would have been able to treat this patient. We would not have received any radiation at all. So I'll finish up. For us, for cranial SRS, the line RT is accurate, reliable, and allows us to have some real-time monitoring of our patients, which is very important. We now use it for all our spinal, abdominal, and pelvic SABR patients. And we've recently introduced it for deep inspiration breath holds, and so we're now using it for all our standard breast patients, right and left breast as well.